Hello, listeners, and hello, viewers. I'm Vibhuti Jha. This is Jaipur Dialogue USA. Welcome to the show. Please like, subscribe, share, and support our channel. Give your feedback. We value your comments. I have never talked about in the past about climate change, although we all know this is an issue which is very strongly discussed, very emotionally analyzed, facts and figures presented on both sides of the aisle. But what's the truth here? I always feel that, you remember Mr. Al Gore when he was in the many years ago, he talked about the inconvenient truth. He made that word very famous, inconvenient truth. And since then, we have heard every 10-year warning that if this doesn't happen in 10 years, the earth will go down the tube. Our lives will be destroyed. Flooding will happen in the coastal cities. And just recently, I was hearing a Pacific Island people talking about that if the fossil fuel issue is not handled, they will go down underwater. So the issue is very critical. Everybody is talking about solutions in 2040, 2050, 2070, how much emissions, CO2 emissions must go down for Earth to remain normalcy. But nobody is addressing the issue that it must be dealt with. Everybody is talking about CO2 emissions. Nobody is talking about the short-term, medium-term, and long-term efforts that need to be made. And then comes in the beef eating part of it. Now, what I know for sure is that while people have been talking about solutions for climate change, one thing hasn't changed: the consumption pattern of human beings. We consume way too much. The waste that happens is way too much. And then comes the cow, the holy cow. And now we know that countries have their own standards of meat eating practices. But insofar as cow is concerned, there is a virtual global unanimity except India, where people eat beef mercilessly to the way they want. It's the tastiest of all meat, I believe, in the marketplace. The question here is, how does this issue impact? The cow itself is a big element. You recently heard Bill Gates talk about that the cows, gas passing, the methane gas is also cause for concern as a climate change issue. More on it later. But today, to talk about this matter in great detail, I have great privilege in calling my friend Mohan Sonti. Mohan Sonti ji is on our show today, and he has done pretty extensive research on that. The impact on India, the impact globally on particularly the beef consumption, the medical impact, the environmental impact, the social impact of consumption of beef. How does it affect the climate change? For all that you know, cow may be the solution to climate change problem that the world is beset with. Mohanji, your take.
Yeah, namaste Vibhuti Ji, and namaste to all the viewers. So, in fact, I have some data and facts that I would like to cover on three different subjects. One is about the health issue itself for beef consumption. The second is the environmental impact. And third is about the amount of resources it consumes to produce beef. So besides these three, we already know about the beef ban and all the hue and cry that the West makes, the hypocrisy behind it. Mm-hmm. Because they have their own other meats that they ban, but somehow when it comes to Bharat, they have a very hypocritical stance. So some of these aspects I think we can cover today.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, if you want, I can start off with some of the points on the health issues.
Yeah.
Let's start with that. So this is from the World Health Organization. This data and the facts come from the World Health Organization, international reports, as well as from the cancer, the government research facility from NIH and other publications. So it is said that as per the data from over 800 different studies, independent studies, as of 2015, coming from International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC. They have classified the beef and red meat as group 1 carcinogen. And what is a group 1 carcinogen? Group 1 means there is an absolutely established link between this meat eating and cancer. So the groups are not the intensity of the cancer, it's more about how absolutely guaranteed the link is. So this is classified along with asbestos, tobacco, and all of them. This is classified as a group 1 carcinogen, meaning this is guaranteed to cause cancer. And this comes from over 800 studies. As of 2015, there are several more were added later. And this is from IARC. All of these are government sites. And as per the World Health Organization report, also coming from various studies, it says we all know that raw meat has the risk of infection, right? So we go with the processed meat, despite the fact that raw meat is also classified as group 2A carcinogen. And what is group 2A? Group 2A is, there is an established link, but it is not guaranteed yet. But there is a very strong evidence that there is a link between that and the raw meat and the cancers. So that is group 2A. Group 1, which is the processed meat, which means it's already established. We know that this is guaranteed to cause cancer. Now, what are the types of cancers that they have come up with? They said that it has several risks. They say eating the red meat, the beef and other red meat, even the processed meat, it actually damages the DNA, and which leads to several types of cancers, such as stomach cancer, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate, and it has several cardiac health issues, and so many other things were linked to it. It's considered one of the worst food ever on the face of earth.
You are referring to beef. You are referring to beef specifically.
Beef, actually, the meat in general, and the beef is the topmost in the entire red meat spectrum as well. Wow. So even within the meats, the topmost level is for the beef. Then comes the other ones like the pork and lamb and things like that. So all in general, the red meat is not good, but in that the beef is the worst offender of all of them. So all these cancers, and like just to put it into perspective, the studies show that about 50-gram portion of this processed meat increases the risk of colorectal cancer by about 18%. Right, and for that of a raw meat, about 100 grams of the portion increases it by about 17%. So this is just for the colorectal cancer. But you have several other instances of other cancers as well, like I have mentioned, like the prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, and all of them. And then added to those cancers is the cardiac issues, cardiac health issues. And all of these is for the processed meat. And within the processed meat, the beef is like the king of it in causing all the kinds of health issues. So this is just about the health related things.
No, what is significant here is that the entire world, including currently RFK Jr., is talking about introducing beef tallow for fries. Apparently, the vegetable oil that reduce the taste and flavor of the fries. And now we know that the fries taste good because it was beef tallow in it. Right? So, all the vegetarians who were consuming the fries in McDonald's or Burger King, remember that you have been consuming beef tallow fry, and that's why it was so very tasty. But it is established. People.
Go ahead.
You wanted to say something?
Yes, actually, if you look at it about the taste and all of that, see, the way our human body responds is basically whatever is easy to absorb, easy to take it in. People have some sort of an addiction for that. That's besides the stimulants and depressants. For example, the sugar it's very addictive because it gives you a quick energy. So anything that is very easy essentially has a higher chance of people liking it.
Right.
Now, the meat is closer to our body and it's much easier to digest compared to the plant matter, which is difficult to digest. In fact, the plant matter digesting is like giving a whole exercise to your intestines. It takes a lot more time, a lot more effort to break it down and digest. So that is like having, when people talk about you exercise well and you have less chance of diseases, it is the same thing. This is internal exercise. It's exercise for your gut. And that is why it also has a lower chance and it is a better absorption too. And meat is in that sense, makes it almost like just like people like sweets. This is the reason, because it's very much easier to actually digest it. That's more like borders on being an addiction. So that's why people who eat meat often absolutely love it and they just want to have more.
I didn't know that it is easy to digest meat. I thought it was tougher to digest meat, earlier.
It's much closer to absorb. It has all the required nutrients that are close to our body. So it's much easier to just absorb it from there. Like, for example, absorbing iron. In fact, doctors talk about if you eat meat, you have less chance of having an iron deficiency. because absorbing iron from the plant matter is a lot more difficult than it is from, say, meat, which has blood and everything, right? So basically, it just gets the required nutrients very quickly,
So from
and
that point
that
of
actually
view,
is a problem.
so from that point of view, it is better to eat meat than vegetables because
Not
vegetarian.
necessarily. It is like saying just because you're more energetic, it's better to have sugar. Not really, because even though it does, so anything that gives you a very quick kick to it, essentially, imagine it makes your whole body lazier. So it's like resting is good, but if you keep sleeping on the bed throughout the day, it is not good for you. It eventually weakens you. So that's kind of what is happening here. The immune system weakens, everything weakens. So that is not necessarily good. It's just it's more an indication of how people get addicted to it and why they start liking it. It is not so much about being good. Just like sugars are not good. I mean, you can eat sugars and say I have the required amount of carbs, required amount of calories.
Right.
If you just call it as calories, then if you have the required amount of calories just by eating sugar, but that is going to cause several diseases down the line, right? So just something is easier and it quickly gets into your body is not necessarily good. Just as laziness is not good, and exercising always helps.
No, this is a very interesting issue because because we are all beset with that. My concern is I don't find everybody talks about the long-term solution. In 2070 or 2050, we will reduce the Earth temperature by 2% and CO2 emission by this percent, and we will be fine. But till then, we may have probably reached a precipice,
Yeah.
impossible to return to that. But what is the short-term solution? What I find that if human beings change their eating habits, I'm not saying don't eat anything, don't eat beef at all. I'm saying if you change your eating habits, you may begin to maybe successful in impacting the change more positively. So what's the data about that? Do you think that excessive meat eating in America is the cause of so much cancer around here?
Absolutely. That is one of the leading cause of the cancers, the meat eating. And in fact, the West, they are very heavy consumers of meat. In fact, only 4% of Americans actually are vegetarians. And even in that 4%, they do it mostly because of health reasons. But none of them is, very few among that 4% are actually doing it for compassionate reasons. So the compassion is already out of the window. But even for the health reasons, it's only 4%. That's the idea of addiction I'm talking about. In Bharat, we have about 40% of the people are vegetarian. So, and that is a 1.5 billion population.
Right.
So the whole notion of people need to eat meat and it's, we don't have enough space to produce vegetables is all complete nonsense. Because if 1.5 billion people can sustain on it, 40% of them are complete vegetarian and another 40% are very mild eaters. So this is mostly about justifying an addiction.
I mean, you are. I think you are right about that because what I find in the U.S. particularly, breakfast begins with sausage and bacons,
And the
right?
cereal, which is all sugar. Remember, I talked about the sugar, and
Right.
the cereals are all doped with sugar. It's heavy sugars, and they put some vitamins and give an impression as if that is the way to get all the vitamins. The earlier meat example is very similar to the vitamin tablets. In fact, at some point in early 2000s, people thought just taking vitamin tablets is very essential. They started selling that. And I think somewhere around 2008 or so, there were clear publications that said taking the vitamin tablets daily does not really help anyone. So in that sense, when earlier you talked about easier absorption of nutrients, that is like taking vitamin tablets. In long run, it is not helpful and that is not healthy either.
Right. And then after the breakfast with bacon and sausages, then you have lunch with sandwiches with the chicken and pork and whatever, and then you have the steak dinner. You are consuming so much meat, and it has impact on climate change. So let's talk about this particular issue is important. Beef,
So
cow, and climate change. Can less consumption of cow and the beef help people understand that it is directly related with the climate challenge?
absolutely 100%. That's because the beef industry and the meat industry is the largest offenders of the climate change. Um, The second largest offender, the industries, actually come very close. And by some estimates, that is probably slightly higher, but give or take, the meat industry and particularly the beef industry in that is the largest offender of the climate change. For example, these are again from, it is in the Forbes magazine as well. And based on several publications, there are a lot of journals and publications on this subject. It says the meat industry, meat and dairy industries, they create about 7.1 gigatons of greenhouse gases. 7.1 gigatons of greenhouse gases, which amounts to about 15% of the man-made emissions. 15% of it. So as a single industry, this is the largest one. And then the beef is by far the biggest offender. Even within that 15%, the beef alone is the biggest offender. This is already just for the meat and dairy industry. And then the beef is the biggest offender, wherein it produces about 60 kilograms of greenhouse for every kilogram of the beef that is produced, right? Which is more than twice the emission of the second highest offender in the meat, that is lamb, right? So talk about the meat coming from the mutton for Eid and other ones, other festivals. Basically, that is the second largest offender, which comes very close to the pork as well. And then if you look at it, the methane that is produced by the beef industry, it is, every estimate shows about 34 times more potent than the carbon dioxide. Meaning for gram to gram, if you have 1 gram of carbon dioxide, and then the methane produced by this meat industry is like 34 times more potent for the greenhouse gas emissions in destroying the environment. So essentially, this is not only one of the worst offenders, but it's also a very potent offender. So people who talk about, who eat beef and talk about saving the environment, to me, it is, I'm not sure if you're okay using this kind of an analogy. It is like the Hitler, all the genocidal maniacs like the Hitler, Mao, and the Winston Churchill talking about the world peace. Because that has nothing to do with the world peace. I mean, they're addicted to it. They want to eat it. They like it. Fine, but don't talk about environment because it's complete hypocrisy. I mean, incidentally, Winston Churchill, who is responsible for killing 3 million Bengalis in famine, was given the Nobel Prize in Literature for exalted human values on that subject. So it is possible they can commit these things and still have that exalted values that they can talk about and get a Nobel Prize. But in reality, this is the largest offender. And like the numbers show, 7.1 gigatons of greenhouse gases just from this industry, despite this being the worst type of food that humans can consume. And it is also the biggest environmental offender.
You use the word offender. So you are talking about the meat industry being the offender, the consumers.
Meat industry being the biggest offender for the greenhouse, for the environmental impact, because the greenhouse gases is 15%. So it is like saying, I'm not going to let go of that. And what other things do you want to change? You want to change the whole world, but you don't want to get rid of the largest offending one, which is also happens to be the worst type of food. It is very unhealthy and produces the largest amount of greenhouse gases, the environmental offender. And still they want to stick with this. It's like saying, just leave this territory alone. That is complete hypocrisy. I think people who eat beef and should not be talking about environment at all.
Tell me one thing. There are two elements to this hypocrisy. One is ignorance. Other one is peddling. So I suspect that like common men and women probably are not even aware of this fact.
Majority of the people aren't. In fact, they're not.
So which means that the official organizations, the lobby and the industry, they are the ones who are not disseminating the information. And surprise, surprise, I mean, though we are in the media, I consider myself a little above average awareness of knowledge and information. I did not know the extent of damage that beef alone does.
Actually, the FDA, the last time, despite these studies coming out and conclusive studies as being a class 1 carcinogen and all the cardiac issues and so many things came out in 2015, the FDA so far has given a very mild statement and very mild guidelines. So there are people who are into this research, who understand these things, are really upset at how these guidelines are made. And you have to remember that it is several hundreds of billions of dollars of industry. So there is a lobbying. So basically, most people, I would say, are completely ignorant of this. And even the people who have some knowledge about it, it's basically the taste, right? I mean, what you're addicted to, what you're
Yeah,
habituated to doing, you find it very difficult to get rid of it despite knowing the facts.
that's right.
So that is the other factor. But for the vast majority, would easily give up if they know that this is such a big offender and it's actually very unhealthy, and it's also highly impactful to the environment. And there is a third factor to it too, about how the amount of resources it consumes. So we can
Right.
also go over that.
I was about to ask you that question. So go ahead, step in.
All right. So the third factor is about the amount of resources that it consumes. The statistics show that, all the numbers show that, for producing about, say, 1 pound of beef, it consumes about 2,000 gallons of water. 2,000 gallons of water to produce a pound of beef. That's about 15,000 liters of water per kilogram, right? Now, just to put this into perspective, most of the vegetables that are grown consume about 100 to 200 gallons of water per pound basis. So this is anywhere between 10 times to 20 times more. And the second largest offender of that is just about half of this 2,000 gallons is again the pork and the lamb. So essentially, the meat industry consumes the largest amount of water per pound of meat that they produce. And the vegetables come almost 1/10 or 1/20th of how much water they consume. This is just for the water part alone. And then, for example, the US beef industry, it uses about 21.2 trillion gallons of water. 21.2 trillion gallons of water annually to produce meat. All right. So essentially, when people talk about water resources, in fact, some people believe that the future wars can potentially be because of water, right? Because you need water is a very important resource.
Mm.
This is how much water it consumes. And at 1/10 of that is what is, or even 1/20th in many cases, is what is consumed by the plants. And also, they eat about 25 pounds per day, which is about 10,000 pounds of food per year to produce a pound of meat. Now, there are people who talk about we don't have enough land and all of that. You use all of that land to produce these plants, and eventually that is what these consume, the cows consume, to actually produce about 10,000 pounds of that to produce 1 pound of meat. So if you see, this is apparently in some places, in a little jovial way, they say this as these are the Olympic champions of how inefficient of to producing food. So these are three factors, right? So you're taking the largest amount of resources, 10 to 20 times of the resources for water, which is very quintessential resource, and the other the fodder and everything, the plant matter, to produce 1 pound. So it takes the largest amount of resources. Two, it is extremely unhealthy. This is again the world champions of being the most unhealthy food, beef. And three, this is the biggest world champion of being the offender of greenhouse gases. Essentially, if there is something called an environmental and a crime on the whole society and the culture anywhere, the beef is the number one criminal for not only consuming the largest amount of resources to produce the least amount of food, it destroys the environment the most efficiently, because the methane is 34 times more potent than the carbon dioxide, and then gives rise to the most unhealthy people because it is class 1, it's a group 1 carcinogen. So it is completely criminal for somebody to not publish all of these things and make people aware of it.
And that brings about a very interesting thought process in my mind, and that is the contribution of cow. Because in our country, in back home in India, not our country here in the US, but back home in India, cow is virtually regarded as a gift of God.
Yep.
All those things put together. So if you are talking about beef being the biggest offender, how does one reconcile mentally the contribution of cow to the societal way of life, society, and eating cow and has a detrimental effect on your health and environment. So is cow the enemy of the economy, of the climate change, or the biggest contributor to the climate challenge that we are facing?
Not
And,
necessarily.
and,
So
and
it is.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Now, Bill Gates talked about the methane gas, and everybody knows about it. So now he is trying to talk about injecting cows so that they do not emit, the methane gas. Now that, if you inject a chemical, it has an impact on the body of the cow. It can have an effect on the people consumer who are consuming beef. What will be the side effect on those people who are the cow being fed with this kind of chemicals? What will be the health impact on people who consume it? It's still unknown. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So basically, what Bill Gates is doing is essentially saying, if you put it in a very raw way, he's basically the cow, the meat, the beef is basically like an addiction.
Right.
So the way these people try to solve the problem is how do instead of solving the addiction itself, they want to see how to make the addiction slightly better and slightly contained and how to modify it. They come up with everything except addressing the elephant in the room, which is that is an addiction that is really bad for your health, that is bad for the environment, and it takes up all the resources. Now, instead of addressing that problem, they want to beat around the bush and go around the things to solve all the peripherals, to see how some of those things can be contained. It's like saying, I will not let go of my addiction. And all the morality part aside, I mean, killing animals love their life as much as humans love their life. So in many places, they are killed pretty mercilessly. And to make matters worse, in many places, especially in America, and many places, they feed cows to cows. Right? It's basically some sort of a cannibalism is what they practice. So just compounds the whole problem. But despite all the moralities aside,
wait. This is something which I didn't know.
Oh, they actually use the meat. They feed meat so the cows can fatten up very fast.
Oh God, I didn't know
So
that.
I mean, the cannibalistic idea is very common in the meat industry. I mean, they do that for the chicken, they do that for pork, they do that for everything. So this way of fattening these animals just so they can produce more meat, they do all kinds of nasty things. But besides that, instead of addressing the problem directly, that this is bad for health, environment, and resources, they want to come up with all kinds of solution in a way to say what Bill Gates is saying is, I want to keep my addiction, and how do I address your concerns about it? The better way to solve it is get rid of the addiction. And it is good for the environment, good for the health, good for everyone. And it's good for the natural resources too. There won't be any wars either because we have a lot more natural resources available. The potential, there were a lot of articles on a potential war over the water wars because water is the quintessential resource. Well, this is the biggest offender. This consumes, like you have seen, 2,000 gallons of water, where the plants consume about 100 gallons. So it's consuming almost 10 to 20 times of water. So essentially, it's about how do I preserve my addiction? That seems to be Bill Gates' solution, rather than promoting the idea that this is actually bad. Get rid of this addiction. Now, the other point that you mentioned about Bharat. So having the cow was, we are an agrarian society. So having cow as part of the whole social order is very different, and that has a very smaller number compared to one that is mass produced just for the sake of meat industry. So it is not like you're having the cow that is part of the whole agrarian society and becomes part of the family. It's part of the ecosystem that the natural life that people lead. This is besides all the advantages that it has. As a cow, it's an integral. We have seen how we as humans and the cows in Bharat can lead some sort of a symbiotic relationship where we help each other, and that becomes almost like an integral part of the family. So it is not so much about worshipping cow. It is about seeing our ancestors have come up with methods where we have become an integral part. We work almost a symbiotic relationship for the agrarian society. But this here, the beef industry is about the churning out more and more cows and making them fat and growing them big. And so you see how this functions. This is an extremely inefficient way of doing it. So it is not a one-to-one correspondence there. That is not affecting the health. And the impact on the environment is also much smaller because we are not having a mindless number of cows just so we can eat them on a daily basis. And therefore, we don't consume as many resources either, because here you have to produce those resources so the cows can consume it. There it is actually a natural balance. It is like the balance between in USA in the past that they had it before they extirpated the wolves and the deer. So they always balance it out. So that is completely natural and close to the natural solution environment. But that is not so when we artificially inflate these numbers so we can consume more, which means we generate other resources so these cows can consume it. And then we produce something very inefficient and unhealthy.
You're talking about the Indian context, and I must share with the audience here, listeners here, a very direct conversation that I had. After finishing my work in a particular city, uh, CEO of the company on a dinner table, this is a direct experience I'm sharing with you, considering what Mohanji mentioned just now, the relevance of cows in the Indian context. And that was Prime Minister Modi's, the beef thing had become a major storyline there. So just bear with me. So this CEO of the company asked me, Vibhuti, can I ask you a tough question about your country and your faith and belief? I said, sure, go ahead. And I remember that conversation almost verbatim. He said, why do you guys worship cow and don't eat beef? And I said, we don't, first of all, as you very rightly said, Mohanji, we don't worship cow as a goddess or something. But we do thank God for giving us an animal called cow in an agrarian society, because it performs functions for our communities that are truly remarkable. One, cow's milk is the most potent milk after mother's milk for a human infant. Not all mothers lactated enough, so the cow's milk in the villages were used for feeding human infants until they became suitable to eat or drink soup or other things. So the question came about that cow assumed a surrogate mother's role, that in the event of a lady mother not having adequate milk of her own, cow's milk subbed there very, very efficiently and very effectively. So my question was, would you kill your mother, which is feeding human infants, just because you want to enjoy the flavor of the meat? And that CEO, with all due respect to him, he said, oh, we didn't think about that. Then I said the second element. There's a very truly remarkable, which I know about. Now, I have lived in Bihar village, and the cow dung, interestingly enough, doesn't have a foul odor to it, if you have noticed that. Cow dung doesn't stink. It has an odor. It doesn't have a foul odor to it. And it is a biodegradable, eco-friendly discharge, which in villages of India, people use for using the cow dung brick for cooking. My mother used to cook on that in the villages. And the cow dung is used for, strengthening the hut, or lighting in the evening, or burning in the evening, so that mosquitoes and insects would not come around. So it was a biodegradable, eco-friendly item, which was used as a fuel as well as an eco-friendly item. This CEO's mind was blown. He said, I had no idea about it. Then I came up with a third one. I said to him that the cow, when she delivers a male or a female, we know that the female will end up being a cow again, but the male will go back into the farm to till the land. So male became also a producer or contributor to the food growing industry, cattle. You had food coming home, food grains sold, and you became an economic unit. The cow also became an economic unit because money came home, money became an element of trade. That guy, at that time, this CEO was saying, geez, Jesus, we didn't even know about any of this. I said, here is the fourth one. Even in her death, the cow hide is used for varieties of purposes. And then I delivered the punchline to him. I said, The Western people, when you use a concept of cash cow for a business, this is what it means. From her birth to death, cow becomes a cash cow for all of us. Would you kill a business which is a cash cow for you? His exclamation was, "Holy cow." I said, that's exactly the point. This is where the word holy cow comes in. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important learning method. I've shared this from time to time, but today I got an opportunity to share it with you here on the subject matter. Why all animals serve a purpose. So, when people ask me why you Hindus don't eat beef, my answer is not that justifying one reason or the other. I say, just as you have restrictions on dog meat, cat meat, or horse meat, Muslims don't eat pork. You don't question that. But why do you question me? Because we are not beef eaters because of all these good reasons. Mohanji, the other part which I wanted to say here, share with you is that, health addiction, you gave the three very important reasons. The fourth is the emotional factor, which economic element that I quoted here. Cow serves a purpose. It doesn't serve the same purpose here in America. But there is one thing called A2 milk, which is very popular. I know that the Indian cows, they have a different kind of a structure, that their A2 milk is far more superior to
Yes.
the normal milk of Jersey cows, as it is known as. But because the West has been very smart about marketing their products, they have also infiltrated the Jersey cows in India at the expense of the Indian cows. Tell us something about that part and how, cow can be, if world wants to solve the climate crisis, protect cows and
Yes.
do not. Yeah, go ahead.
So one additional point to the list that you have mentioned, the cow dung is also used for fertilizers, and it's the most natural fertilizer. And the cow urine also has its own properties. And there's a lot of research on that, and there's many benefits. Essentially, we live almost like in a symbiotic relationship. So they are almost integral part of our life in Bharat, for any agrarian society for that matter. Now, regarding the A2 milk, see, we have almost 1,000 breeds of cows, and each one is very specific to a region. And these were evolved over thousands of years because, like I said, even all the way to the Vedas, for thousands and thousands of years ago, we have been having the cows. So they're very fine-tuned with the best quality over the thousands of years. What the West has done, like you have rightly mentioned, is they want to sell their product. So besides the three elements of the beef industry that is being criminal, the one additional thing that they have done is they want to kill, even though it's a much better, like you said, the A2 milk in Bharat, and each of the breeds in each location also produce something that is native and local to that area. That's why each of those cows have slightly different looks, but they are very native to that area. What the West is trying to do is, in the process of destroying the competition, they're actually destroying something that is really good. It is like saying, I'm going to get a lower grade version from here, and I'm going to kill a superior version over there, because to them, it is about business and money. It is not about what is good for humanity. And that is a key problem on why they have sent it over there. And unfortunately, in the past, we had governments. And if I have to say it openly, it is the Congress government, because I know there are a lot of bills and laws that they have passed. Despite Article 48 in the Constitution, which completely prohibits killing the cows, slaughtering any of the cows and calves, and also promoting the native breeds and strengthening those breeds. This is in the Constitution in 1950, Article 48. It's already written there.
You are referring to the Indian Constitution.
Indian Constitution, despite that the Congress government completely ignored everything that's in the Constitution. Essentially, it's almost they don't, to them, they behave as if the Constitution is merely like a little suggestion, which they sometimes may want to follow if they really think it is useful. So they did several instances that you can quote in our history where they they didn't care about the Constitution. This is one critical area where they started introducing these foreign breeds, because in Bharat, we had about 150 million cows for a 350 million population. That was in 1950. In 2024 or 2020, the 150 million cows became 190 million, little less than 200 million. But the 350 million population, human population, went to 1.5 billion. So this disproportionality happened because they completely ignored the government, successive Congress governments have completely ignored the importance of the cow. And later, when you want more milk, they started getting the foreign cows. And they started introducing Jersey cows and the Russian cows and all of them, which have a bigger udder, and just so they can show the numbers. It's almost like, say, a business that simply goes by the numbers without having any morality or common sense, right? So you need milk now. 200 million cows, 150 million cows used to produce milk for 350 million people. Now 200 million have to produce for 1.5 billion people. So they started, instead of, the correct solution should have been to increase the number of cows and help with the breeds. But quite the contrary, they started shutting down many of the native breeds, like going against Jellicatu and many other things that are there in different areas of Bharat. They started compromising our own native breeds, which has a superior quality. And if they have more of those breeds, then that will solve the problem. But instead, this is like the corporate structure, where they have an inferior product from other countries, from Western countries, who want to kill the native cow breeds, which has a superior quality. And our Congress government in the past has actually let all of them in. To me, that is a completely criminal and completely disregard for the Constitution itself. But hopefully, currently, the government is slowly making some changes in that. So hopefully, the tide will turn, and we don't go into a mad rush of the corporate structure of, I have some product which, even though it's not as good a quality, but I want to kill the competition, so I want to kill all the native breeds, which is completely counter to humanity. It's not good for us. These breeds have come in for thousands of years. To me, getting rid of these kind of breeds is criminal.
Wow. I mean, I have very good reasons for disliking the Congress party. Now, you added another dimension to it that I did not know, that the total population of cows were 150 million or whatever in a population base of 350 once upon a time.
Correct.
And that population has increased only by 40 million,
That's
which
it.
means that the Congress party deliberately sabotaged the domestic growth of cow industry and the cow as a source of economic welfare. And they definitely must have milked the cow to make their money by importing all these cows and this entire process.
There is something worse. There is
There's
something
something
worse.
more. Yeah.
Yes. So it's, besides milking the cow, essentially suppressing the local breeds or
Yes.
ignoring it over the
Yes.
decades, which, despite the Constitution saying that we have to strengthen it, because our society is based on that, and our breeds are not like some new type of breeds. These are evolved over thousands of years, right? And it's a very well crafted. This is how the human, at least the whole Indian population, that's how they were for thousands of years. The second criminal act that they did was, despite one is ignoring these breeds and suppressing them, they also introduced the cara beef, the idea of cara beef, which is basically buffalo meat. Because the Constitution talks only about the cows, even though it talks about draft cattle, but still they probably found a loophole and they introduced the idea of cara beef. Our cara beef is buffalo meat. So it is a backdoor way of introducing beef into our country. Now, the cara beef production was negligible in 1950s, and come 1970s and 80s, all the Congress government, we had a dramatic growth rate in the amount of cara beef that we produce. And slowly they started having the consumption of cara beef too within Bharat, which means it's like giving people remember the addiction is giving the people a taste of the beef. So that is the second criminality that they have done, because they started making people first taste it. And once they get the addiction, in fact, to me, this sounds very close to the opium wars and other wars, where many countries try to get the other countries get addicted to something, so that eventually the civilization collapses. So this is actually, it is directly an attack on Bharat, because they wanted to introduce this through a backdoor method, through cara beef. So there are two things that they have done. They have to get rid of that cara beef. And then second, they have to increase the population of the native breeds, pay focus on it, and make sure we have all the native breeds actually prosper. And that happens, our Bharat is going to be prosperous, healthy, and good.
Look, I mean, this is a pretty sensational conversation that I am enjoying and learning a lot from this. But for people, we are not recommending don't eat meat. We are not recommending don't eat beef. But what the message is important here is to know the impact it has on you. And what is the implication of that impact is very important to understand. So when RFK Jr. talks about making America healthy again, I'm sure he knows this. Probably, hopefully, there will be better changes in America. But America also has to be careful because there are some ridiculous studies that are floated in media, and a couple of them I made note of it. There was I think I shared that with you also. Humans may be feeling global warming by breathing, and they showed the picture of yoga being performed in a garden. Now you see the subliminal message that yoga is responsible for your breathing because that is the breathing exercise you do there. See the sinister nature of the attacks that happen. The other one was by owning a pet, you are doing more damage to the environment. Go ahead. Another one was this happened in the World Economic Forum, the net zero zealots. They were discussing how drinking coffee can be blamed for CO2 emission. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to view the data with a discriminatory mind and use your common sense to do that. I have often said that probably, if any one of you have remembered the story of the man-eater of Kumau, the tiger who tasted human blood and human meat, and he could not go back to eating his food.
Yes,
So
that's the problem.
that's the problem. The human meat perhaps must be the tastiest of all meat because it's fully marinated with sweet and sour and all the salt and all the spices in it. So thankfully, nobody eats human meat. Otherwise, you and I could be a sitting duck, if I may use the phrase. So
I just want to add one point regarding the academia. The
yes,
thing
please.
is, if you look at our sages, our ancient sages, so they were never required money. Even the sages today, the saints and all of them in Bharat, so they are not after money, they're not after power. So power cannot influence them and corrupt them. Money cannot influence them and corrupt them.
Correct.
So they could actually think free and come up with what is the truth. But the equivalent of that in the West is the academia. The academia can be threatened by the governments and other lobbies, and they can be purchased as well, because a lot of academia, they require funds the way they perform today. So I'm not saying all the academia is bad. All that I'm saying is it is compromisable because they can be purchased, they can be influenced with the power. The reason, instead of the research, the ones that you just talked about breathing, they can invest in nonsense very easily.
Yeah.
Because if they get funding and they get their food on the table, so they will do the nonsense if there's money for it. And there's a lot of academic articles are like that, wherein they do all kinds of research on complete meaningless things, which really has no real value to humanity, while completely distracting people into looking at it and distracting them from the real big issues, which actually have an impact. And even the ones that actually have an impact, then this money part is taken over by the politics, where the power comes into the play, and they compromise it further. So to the tune that at some point it's very hard to know which one is the truth and which one isn't. So we have to sift it very carefully. It's like picking the gold out of this big sand, right? It's very difficult to sift through that and see which one is a garbage and which one is the right information. The academia is not entirely bad. It's just that it's compromisable, which means from time to time, we will get a lot of garbage because the industries, the lobbying, the power centers, they will compromise it. And that is the problem. So I would anyway trust the Indian, our ancient wisdom, our sages, who could not be compromised because they cannot be purchased and they don't care about the power. So we find a lot of those among the Indian system. In Bharat,
they were not wealthy either.
Because they didn't care about the money and they don't care about the power either. And which means they can actually think freely. And nobody can say that I'll give you some money, so can you just prove that sugar is extremely good for your health? Philip Morris did it, actually. It's not too long ago, don't you think?
Yep.
Philip Morris actually had these kind of articles. You can purchase them. And there were a lot of articles where they said it's really not bad at all. Until you really The dam actually broke at some point, and they could not contain it anymore. And the real results came out and said, "Okay, all right, I agree. It was always bad." Right?
Now I know how the West or the English education blamed the Brahmins for all the problems because they did not.
Because we are ruining their plot. We are ruining their. See, if we go with the facts, we are going to ruin their business. We are going to ruin everything because they are trying to do something nefarious. Oftentimes,
The
like they
goddamn
want to
Brahmin.
kill all the cow breeds in Bharat. They want to bring in inferior quality and kill all the cow breeds, and they'll have their academia. If with the right amount of money,
Mhm.
they will produce some results based on that. Even the A to milk idea came in only now. If you remember, all the cows also had some hormones that they used to inject not too long ago.
Right.
Right? So you see, these things started changing because of the pressure from many other people who actually know the truth, and they started spreading the news.
Right.
Otherwise, many of these things are kind of compromised. They can produce any results.
Yes, you are right. I mean, there was another funny storyline that I read. Living long is the reason for deaths. Living itself is the cause for death.
Cause for death, yes.
And then
They
there
can
are
find the research.
alcohol industry used to publish, oh, 2 drinks are good for health. A
Yes.
wine is good for health. I mean, those are studies.
Yeah.
I hope Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy use Doge effectively to curb those pork barrel projects which the congressmen and congresswomen or senators push through their agenda for very serious issue. It's not a laughing matter, actually. It is a very serious issue. How these concerned lobbies influence the gullible public. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where I will end this conversation today. Thank you, Mohanji, for enlightening us with so much of information. And remember one thing, it's impossible to know everything in the world. But today you have access to this. You have access to this. Go do your own research. Don't trust Mohan and me. You don't need to. But we gave you a thought. Test it out. Check it out yourself. You won't lose a thing. You no longer have to go to the government archives to gather information. It's right in your palm, literally and figuratively speaking, in your palm. Figure it out. Find out. This climate change is for a very specific purpose. Certain industries are pushing their agenda. You know that. It's time for us not to be befooled by these things. This is what is important. Don't get fooled by statements that excessive breathing causes CO2 emissions. Think about it. Can there be something more ridiculous than that? Right? With these words, as I always say, Satyameva Jayate, for truth to triumph, you got to fight for it. You got to stand up for it. Thank you, Mohanji. Thank you all for
Namaste.
joining today.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.